Hello there. I'm going to be slightly breaking down the Semrah fight, uh, and essentially how to set up a team to go into it. Um, the way the way Semrah works, without even getting into the mechanics of each phase and how to clear that, is basically that you're gonna get clapped by a lot of damage repeatedly. Uh, so the most critical part when building your team is essentially just ensuring the survival of the team in most situations. We do have a fairly limited selection of which champions allow us to do that. The most accessible one is Volka. She has... there we go. She has her Midnight Requiem, which will give a 30% damage reduction debuff, but she only applies this conditionally. When she has her stacks of Scarlet Ferment, she'll start consuming those stacks and deal that damage reduction. Now, there are a few ways to increase this. You can get her Awakening, which will make her consume less stacks, and you can also get her Exclusive, which actually I probably have to go here to actually check that. Her Exclusive, which I believe... There we go. Chance of gaining the stacks will increase with the basic attack. This means that you can mostly keep that debuff up. It will still probably drop off at times, but the only semi-reasonable, mostly free-to-play way to get that very important damage reduction debuff is with a Volka A5 and her exclusive. It will work with none of those, just you may suffer a lot of RNG. The other option that we have, really, well, arguably we could get into Brokkir because he shields like the 4 units around him, but in my opinion that is mostly irrelevant because it's only 4 of the units, not your whole team. Where is he? Alistair. Alistair was a fusion. For anyone who did miss him, I am terribly sorry for you, because he is phenomenal for this. He will apply a damage reduction up to 30% as well. And this is permanent. As long as Alistair is alive, because he will reach his talent stacks fairly quickly, and then once he does, that's it. You constantly have that damage reduction on the boss, and 30% is massive. So that's on the debuffing the boss side of things. We do have some other options in terms of just healers that will allow us to survive longer, or just units in general. Aylin has... where is it? Yeah, allies in range will receive up to 15% less damage. This is incredibly good. Again, just stacking... The more of these buffs or various sources of damage reduction you will stack together, the more you will survive successfully. There is Sadie. The only problem, and she does this passively, so that's great, and she also has her ultimate to survive the bigger hits, like, say, for example, the Saw phase. The only problem with Sadie is that she has a very small range. And this can be somewhat interesting because, for the most part, your melees can probably get away with surviving decently well the hits, and it's really your platform units that will suffer, especially if you're bringing in epics to the fight. So Sadie does have her uses. I believe I use her in Apocalypse 1 just to keep everyone alive to hit that 30k. But this does work. It is an option, it's just not a fantastic one. And then we have the best other option, which is Ferssi. Ferssi also has a passive. Granted, it's just AoE damage reduction, but most of Semrah is AoE damage. Most of the big hits are AoE damage. The ones that he will not help with are the poison and those rock falls that will target individual units. For everything else, he works phenomenally well. He also provides inspiration, which is something else that we're going to want in this fight, but only to a certain amount of units, and it's not really his most critical factor. Their most critical factor is really just this passive. So you are going to want, ideally, the debuff on the boss, so either Alistair or Volka, and one of these reduced damage taken units. Without one of those two things, you will probably struggle as soon as you start climbing in the stacks, and very quickly you'll have units die to the hits that are dished out because the damage is, once again, pretty phenomenal. The boss does have one other mechanic that is somewhat consistent through the phases. It is his Palm Strike, where he will slay on the ground. It does AoE damage to the whole team. Great, that's awesome. But then he will have a rock fall and target whichever unit has the most HP. Now, you essentially have two options for this, right? You can take a defender, of which we have a plethora of options, or some fighters will work for this. It depends on what you have available. Arguably, the best choice is probably Jeera for this. You can maybe make Elder work as well. Jeera is simply phenomenal in the sense that she has that stacking HP. First off, she has her talent that gives 30% extra HP, and then increases max HP by 40% again on her ultimate, and that goes up to even plus 60%, so that's basically, she's almost doubling her HP. I do not have her, so I'm not really sure, but this may actually be multiplicative and not additive, in the sense that it's applied to her total HP once she enters the battlefield, and not just her base HP, but I may be speaking out of turn here. You could, to an extent, use someone like Abomination. It may work. Once you hit high enough stacks, that just simply will not work anymore, though. But to go back to our tanks, we have actually a few good options that will bring value to the fight. There's Torodor. Torodor will bring his defense reduction and somewhat consistent stuns. This is good because getting more stuns on phase 1 can help if you're not using one of the units that basically solos phase 1. Reves, in the same line, provides stun and is a tank, so some extra value there. I am not sure, however, how reliable getting his ultimate up every single time is, because I don't have to, I have not been able to test him on this. And then you have a bunch of other random ones. Gon doesn't really bring anything special. Hars doesn't really bring anything special. Let me just double check what I'm saying here, but yeah, he just tanks, so not great options overall. Reggie can maybe help a bit by absorbing the damage of adjacent allies, but again, this is a small range. Torodor kind of stuns, so maybe. Trusk is just flat out pretty much worthless. Let's not talk about Orm because he's terrible. You could maybe get some value out of Cyrus, because you get some attack speed and damage when the skeletons are getting low life. Oh wait, hold on. Is it just Cyrus? Nah, it's just Cyrus. Never mind then. So, no, Cyrus actually probably doesn't bring much besides just being a lord. Azhor is one of the somewhat useful ones, again in the same line as Reves and Torodor. He does provide some stuns. He's not great, though, but it is possible. Brokkir, if you have some very squishy units, you can use him to grant some additional physical and magic damage reduction to adjacent allies. He will also possibly freeze occasionally the boss, providing some level of stuns. Constance is probably one of the best ones, if you had to use a tank, though. Constance will give her inspiration buff, she will heal, and she will tank. Overall, you can probably just run her in a glacier set. That should be enough. That is what I do. If you're using her as the tank. And then you have all of these epics, which for the most part, are just not great. The one who is arguably slightly above the rest would probably be Livian, because she provides some stuns. So, to recap at this point, you want those damage reduction units, so you're probably at least at 2 units. And you want one thing to tank those rocks falls from the slam. So at this point, you're already at 3 units, and you only have 7 slots left. We're going to attack the... We're going to start by the end here with phase 3, just because it's the most clear-cut one. You have Aylin, and you have Medan. And that's basically it. For cleansing, they will add Nasande soon if they stop postponing this update. So we will eventually have 3 options. There are some more heroes that do cleanses. Don't get me wrong, it's just that it's Desomi who kind of has a conditional cleanse that's not... It doesn't feel extremely consistent by reading the kit, but I do not have Desomi, so I will not talk too much on this. There is Eunomia, who is just flat out terrible. 3 allies in range every 40 seconds. That's garbage. It will not help you survive a phase 3 on this boss. So really that brings us back to Aylin, Medan, and to be deployed in game, Nasande. And I'm going to be honest, if you don't have Aylin, you're going to struggle to push far. You can get some pretty good scores. You can go up to 80-ish K with a Medan. It will just require substantial gear, substantial roster, and overall a lot more effort than it would with Aylin. Aylin is, as usual, a cut above the rest in terms of healing, in terms of cleansing, and she just provides that rage regen and her wood elf, which is surprisingly useful. So that covers mostly phase 3, and again we're adding 1 more unit. So now at this point we're at least at 4, and we have 6 slots left. While we're here, you're probably going to need at least 1 to 2 more healers. Some good options here are, again, one we talked about earlier, which was Ferssi or Aylin or Sadie. You probably going to want at least one of those 3. So that brings us up to 2 healers, but chances are you will want a 3rd. Now, whether that's someone like Dolores for the inspiration, someone like Constance who doubles as tank and healer and inspiration, someone like Carnelian to save you in a pinch. We're now at this point up to our 4 to 5 units roughly, and we're only left with 5 to cover 2 other phases. Because we have our tank, we have our damage reduction units, and we have our healers. Which brings us to phase 1. And you have kind of 2 ways of approaching phase 1. Phase 1, when he does his saw blade, you will need to have some stuns, or some freezes, or some knockups, or some just general crowd control going at the boss. Immobilize, I believe, also works. And hero options are to either have one champion do it all. So the options for that are fairly limited, because you're going to want to consistently reach 7 to 8 stacks, which is complicated with most units. It's doable with Thallen. You can do it. It's just a little bit complicated to time. I have tried on someone else's account with an unskilled Thallen mostly. It works out for a while, but it's by I think after 2 saw blades and the builds that I could get on his account, it just didn't, and it stopped working. On the 3rd saw blade, he was not up in time, and it did not. You just died. One option that is surprisingly consistent and actually solos this most of the time is Helga. If you have her exclusive, she's just flat out terrific. Doesn't need to be skilled, doesn't need a lord, doesn't need anything. She will have her ult up on time, and she will easily do 7 to 8 ultimates with a decent build. If you start really focusing attack speed, you can probably push this higher. I'm just not sure it's really necessary, because most teams will have 1 or 2 more sources of stuns. But we'll get to that in a second. And the last option that will really genuinely be able to solo stuns consistently, besides again some that we've talked about earlier like Reve, is going to be Nazeem. Where is he? There he is. This crummy epic that no one has ever considered using before Guild Boss 2 has his ultimate, who will easily deal probably 12 stacks on his own. Not gonna lie, I kind of just toss him on Apocalypse 1 on someone else's account, and it works. I never really counted the stuns, I never really bothered with anything else. He is kind of self-sufficient and gets the numbers that I'm trying to get to on that account. The second option is having multiple units that will dish out enough stuns together, which is also a very viable option. So people like Abomination, RNG, so it may not always work. People like Araka, so she does it every, I believe, 3 attacks when she's skilled up. She'll dish out a stun, which is actually consistent, which is good, but it's not an incredible amount of stuns, because even if you push your attack speed, you're going to be at, what, 3 attacks every 3.6 seconds. The boss's stun cast probably really only lasts 6, maybe 7. You add some more stuns in there, it'll last maybe a little bit more, but you're probably really only getting 2 to 3 stuns out of her on any given fight, on any given saw cast, so it's not terrific. You have Jeera, if you have her A1 and there is Radiant Erosion on the boss. So, again, kind of a conditional opportunity there. And I believe that's actually mostly it on the fighters, which is kind of sad. Maybe Uridan or Claw. I honestly have not read their kits, and chances are you're not going to want to use them. Marksman, you do have people like Cetrim, who every... how many attacks? Every 5 attacks, roughly, will dish out a stun attack, so this is maybe getting you 1 to 2 stuns per cast. You have Hex, who will, if you're lucky, give you stuns, but really not a reliable unit either. It's just to add a few more stacks in there. And Lucius, if you do have him A3, will provide some amount of stuns, but him as well, it's a 1 in 4 chance, I believe, to get a stun out of it. And most of the other marksmen will not help you. In the mages, however, we do have some more options. We have the kind of, again, once more, RNG Ajax, but you're probably not using Ajax in Guild Boss 2. I have slotted in some teams, just really because there were no good other options, and that damage boost was valuable. But he should not be the priority, and you shouldn't really count on him. Nocturne will not bring anything here. None of these, I believe, genuinely do stuns. Twin Fiend is actually a surprisingly good one. He is a Lord. He does vulnerability on A1. And he provides a very consistent 3 stuns. And his ultimate will basically systematically be up for each saw cast. So if you are running an Infernal team, 3 stuns he provides are actually quite nice. But once more, this is more of a side effect and cannot be your main stun strategy. Praetus' ability will also dish out stuns if you wait up to at least 2 stacks. The first one does not. The second one will do a stun. And is it... do we get more stuns on? Yeah. No. So then you have people like Mary, could use her. She provides some vulnerability on top of doing her freeze. You can get her build in a way that she will have her ultimate ready for each saw phase. And if I'm not wrong, those are really the only true options we have at this time. If I have forgotten one, please do tell. Add it, yeah, at least at the very least in the GitHub, where I've already listed quite a few of these. And that's really mostly your options for phase 1. Taking us anywhere between 1 to 3 slots. Again, so we're left with just a few damage units to put into our team, which is good, because that's basically all we need, really, for phase 2. So phase 2 is that Aegis phase. He will gain stacks over the course of the battle, and in doing so, he will increase his own damage, and he will reduce the damage that you do to him. Which essentially means that you have 2 ways of going around this. 3 ways of going around this, sorry. Option 1 is bursting him down as quick as possible as soon as the phase starts, so that even if his damage reduction does ramp up significantly, you have taken a big enough chunk off at the beginning that you can clear the wave nonetheless. Option 2 is using enough sources of true damage, or just damage, vulnerabilities or defense reduction. So essentially ways to overcome this additional damage reduction that the boss is stacking. And the very last way of dealing with this is using Lucius, which does work, and will work even better as soon as they release their ridiculous nerf to Apocalypse 2 to Semrah in general for absolutely no reason. But whatever. Lucius was usable, is usable, and works right now. There's no reason to do whatever it is that they're currently planning on doing, but they're doing it nonetheless. So pretty soon Lucius is going to be absolutely busted for Semrah. So, good news, I guess, for those that wanted to remove some of the only endgame content we do have. As far as actual units that will allow you to get that vulnerability, that damage increase on your end, we go back to the inspiration I was talking about earlier. Inspiration is absolutely massive on that phase. And we go to basically any unit that, gives vulnerability, gives damage, defense reduction, or, again, simply true damage units. This does mean a lot of units, really a lot. Ares does this by way of his ultimate, by way of his just basic attacks. Valk does this on her basic. She does magic damage reduction, magic damage vulnerability. This is actually incredibly good if you're running a mostly magic team. I have Valk in my Apocalypse 2 team that goes up to 140k. It's essentially only for this reason. And because she's an Arbiter, so obviously that boosts by other Arbiters. Then I'm probably forgetting some, mainly the units that I do not have, but hey. Ardea will occasionally provide bleeds, so it's something. It will give you that extra physical damage taken on the boss, but you have a lot of better bleed options if really you're just going for the bleed. Lust will, at A1, give some defense reduction, so she is an option. Magda, I believe, is also a semi-decent option here. Penetration increase, which is pretty nice, all things considered, because you're foregoing again once more that resistance. The Arbiters here will provide some true damage, which is always a plus. We kind of went over the tanks earlier and what they did and which ones were useful. On the Marksman, Silas is, as usual, the one that provides almost the most value. Because he just flat out ignores defense, he deals a ridiculous amount of damage. He will overall be good, especially if he's Lord boosted, or mainly if he's Lord boosted. Hex does surprisingly well as well. I mean, actually, what am I talking about? It's not surprising. It's Hex. Hex does well as well in terms of damage, especially if you can get him Lord boosted, and if you have his exclusive. Lucius is, well, Lucius. He will do pretty good work. You can even let him go into demon mode realistically, because he does start stacking up damage with that. And try to find where it is. Every attack ignores 20% of defense. There we go. During demonic mode, so he is another source of just ignoring that stacking extra damage reduction. Mage-wise, we have mostly the Arbiters that are very good for this. Maybe Seraphina is good on Apocalypse 2. Or on Semrah in general. I'm really not sure. I have never built or tested her. I know Solkadin's is absolutely insane because of his meteor. He deals just massive amounts of damage in one hit. If you get that off early on in the Aegis phase, it will just shred the boss. Nocturne is also good due to his true damage. And those are really the most prominent options. I mean, the entire Arbiter faction is good if you have a Lord for them just because of Kratos. And if you want to look for the more budget options, there is possibly her. I do want to build her eventually and mess around with her to see how much value you can actually get from her. But she does seem to have an interesting kit based on true damage. So if you're struggling to reach any damage caps, she could be the answer to these. But overall, that's roughly the idea you're going to want to follow. You make sure that your team survives with damage reduction units. You make sure that you have someone to tank that hand slap. You make sure that you have what you need to survive and cleanse the poison and just the overall heals throughout the fight. You make sure that you can handle the soft phase, and then with everything left, you ensure that your already existing team is going to dish out the maximum amount of damage possible. And if they don't, you add more units that are specifically designated to do damage. I know that when I was getting blocked on an Arbiter, on an Aegis phase with my team, what helped was not adding more damage. It was actually dropping some of my damage units and instead slotting in someone who applied a vulnerability. It was improving my invigoration gear on Constance. It was essentially tweaks that better boosted my biggest damage dealers over just trying to slot in more damage dealers. So food for thought. That was just really kind of a ramble on Semrah. So apologies for the length of that and the possible lack of structure, but that's what I wanted to go over today. So cheers. Have a nice one.